Hello, I am Washtenaw County Sheriff Jerry Clayton.
And I am Washtenaw Intermediate School District Superintendent Scott Menzel.
Our police officers are seeing children who have been affected by trauma and toxic stress every day. That's why law enforcement is excited about the Handle with Care initiative. This initiative bridges the communication gap between schools and law enforcement to better support the children who need it most. The Handle with Care initiative is simple. When one of your students is exposed to a traumatic event, that could be anything from a house fire to a shooting to domestic violence, a law enforcement officer will notify the designated individuals at your school in the form of a Handle with Care notice to the child's teacher.
Because Washtenaw ISD is committed to supporting educators across our county, we've developed these series of videos that will help you understand some of the short and long-term signs of trauma that you might observe in a child while at school. The videos will also provide you with some helpful information about how you can create a supportive environment in your classroom. Lastly, we'll direct you where you can find even more information on trauma in children. On behalf of the members of the Handle with Care Cross-Sector Implementation Team, thanks for your commitment to supporting the children and youth of Washtenaw County.
Hello, my name is Carly Lee, and I am a behavioral consultant at Washtenaw Intermediate School District. In this video, I will share with you how working with children who have experienced trauma may affect you. Take a minute to look around the room. You may be surrounded by those doing the same work as you, or perhaps someone doing something different. However, you are all sitting together because you have one thing in common. All of you have chosen to work in a helping profession. Most of you chose this work because it can be rich with meaning, action, and the power to make a difference. Maybe some of you chose teaching or working with children because you envisioned it looking something like this. Yet, for some of you, it may be something very different. You may be experiencing things day after day that are challenging, difficult, and sometimes painful. It may look more like this. Those in helping professions, they are at risk every day to experience lasting psychological changes in the way that they see themselves and the world around them. Some of these changes will be positive and lead to deeper understanding of themselves and what they value in their life. However, some of the changes have the potential to exhaust the professional and lead to symptoms of psychological trauma or secondary traumatic stress. Secondary traumatic stress or secondary trauma refers to the presence of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder-like symptoms, caused by at least one indirect exposure to trauma. What constitutes an indirect exposure to trauma is any person who just listens to the trauma stories of another, and in your case, a child. Despite the professional approach to the situation, the brain begins to absorb and record the trauma and feels it as its own. It is also important to identify the term compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is the less stigmatized label for secondary traumatic stress and can be used interchangeably. Those affected by secondary trauma or compassion fatigue may find themselves re-experiencing personal trauma, or sometimes they develop symptoms similar to those of the children they work with. It is as if their brain and body just begin to shout out in all of these ways. I am not okay. I cannot handle the trauma. Symptoms of secondary traumatic stress include things such as intrusive thoughts and memories about the event or the story that was shared with you, intense emotions of hopelessness, guilt, anger, or fear, isolation, or hypervigilance, feeling on guard, being jumpy, or physical ailments such as exhaustion, tension headaches, or sleep disruption. It's this overall feeling that the trauma of another The trauma of the child is your trauma. Those at risk for the development of secondary traumatic stress include any professional who works directly with traumatized children and is in the position to hear the recounting of traumatic experiences. Those at a greater risk for secondary traumatic stress include individuals who are highly empathetic by nature. They are so good at trying on the shoes of others, but left not able to get out of them. They have unresolved personal trauma of their own and may identify more closely with those children they work with, are isolated socially and lack social support, or have inadequate self-care, or the added stress in other areas of their life. The most widely used tools to identify secondary traumatic stress include informal self-assessment strategies, such as questionnaires, checklists, or scales, which help characterize the individual's trauma history, their emotional relationship, the work they do, and symptoms associated with traumatic stress. At this point, I pause for a moment. I do this because just writing or talking about this work makes me feel superhuman. I mean, we trained for this, right? We chose our profession. I feel fine. Do you feel fine? The problem with this talk out is that our brain and our bodies, when they absorb and internalize trauma or trauma stories, they don't ask us what we think. When the PTSD-like symptoms arise, we may not even be thinking. It may be hard for us to identify what we feel or know of ourselves. So that is why we continue with what we can do for ourselves to prevent secondary traumatic stress and build resiliency. To prevent individuals who work with traumatized children from developing PTSD-like symptoms, it is important for them to have strategies to both reduce their risk and increase their resiliency to secondary traumatic stress. Some of these prevention strategies include increasing their self-awareness of secondary traumatic stress. What are my triggers? What do I do in the face of big, strong emotions? And what do I say to myself? To continue with individual training on risk reduction and self-care, and to practice self-care in the form of sleep, exercise, nutrition, and stress reduction activities to maintain a healthy work-life balance. And my personal favorite is a personal resilience plan. Resiliency is the ability to bounce back in adverse situations. Resiliency affects many, if not all, aspects of your professional and personal life. Yet applying resiliency can be challenging, especially when dealing with children and children who have experienced trauma. But good news, the more we practice resiliency, the more we learn, and the better we are at it. Resiliency is not a trait that you either have or you don't have. It is something we can build for ourselves. Building resiliency can look something like this. It's maintaining a sense of perspective. Is this a big worry or a little worry? Anticipate your challenges. Focus on the way you can meet them. Laugh. It is very healing and can help you let go of your worries for just a few moments. Take action. Figure out what you can do and take one small step at a time. If identified, it is important to seek interventions for secondary traumatic stress. If not addressed, over time, secondary traumatic stress has the capacity to change your hard wiring and who you are or who you feel like as an individual. Best practices for intervention include cognitive behavioral strategies and mindfulness-based methods. In conclusion, we are never going to eliminate the stressors of our work or our personal lives, but we can transform how we are in relationship with those stressors and move forward with positivity and hope. We can show up each day prepared for whatever child walks into our life and can continue on this journey to help others and ourselves.